Okay, it's 11:03 now, and a warm welcome once again to everyone, to all our participants. And I'm very happy to see this large number of participants who are interested in our today's HeFDI data talk. My name is Ortrun Brand. I'm part of the HeFDI coordination team, and I'm very happy to talk today about the DFG requirements on research data management. The German Research Foundation, DFG, you all submit lots of proposals to the DFG or to other research foundations, and they want you, and it's mandatory up to now, to talk about research data management in your proposal. And today I will talk about those DFG requirements. I have a few remarks in the beginning, and then I will talk about the framework, the DFG guidelines and checklist, and then what to look out for with respect to your DFG proposal. And we have some hints for bad and good practice and for CRCs. And in the end, there's a small wrap up, and afterwards we go into the discussion. Okay, some remarks in the beginning. As I said, I will talk about the guidelines of the German Research Foundation, but the DFG sets the pace for many other funding programs, such as it has the Löwe program or the funding programs by the BMBF, also Volkswagen Stiftung, etc. They all look more or less to the DFG guidelines concerning research data management, so might also be applicable for other funding programs. And it's also very important, we talk about general aspects with respect to research data management, but always look at your discipline or subject-specific guidelines. If you have a look at the DFG pages for research data management, they have subject or discipline-specific guidelines from the DFG Fachgesellschaften. So they set the pace for your respective discipline, so have a look at it, please. But of course, we can provide you with a lot of advice, also subject-specific, but as we work at the universities for all disciplines, it's more or less generic what we talk about. And also the National Research Data Infrastructure, I will talk about it later on as well. They have these 26 consortia which are discipline or subject specific or data specific. You need to have a look at them as well for very special information on your discipline. And that's what I wanted to remark in the beginning, and then we can get started with the framework which sets the pace, the DFG guidelines and checklists. We have a DFG Code of Conduct, which was renewed in 2019, and up to now it's legally binding for all universities to be ready for funding by the DFG. And in 2019, they renewed the guidelines for dealing with research data. And there are 19 guidelines, and 11 of which relate to the research process as such. And research data management is relevant in 8 of these 11 guidelines, which are relevant for the research process. And we will have a very short look at them right now. So these are guidelines mentioning research data management or addressing research data management in one or the other way. And I will just give you a very brief look at 3 of them, which to us are most important, which is guideline 12 on documentation, guideline 13 on providing public access to research results, and guideline 17 on archiving. And guideline 12 says more or less what you should do is generally document your research process properly, including what you're doing on research data, what kind of research data you're obtaining or processing, and also the software you use, either you develop or you use for processing your research data. And guideline 13 is most important, the one on public access to your results. Guideline 13 recommends to publish the research data on which your publications are based. Publish it whenever possible. Of course, there might be data protection restrictions, etc. So it's not possible, but whenever possible, you're supposed to publish your research data. And guideline 13 also recommends to be compliant with the so-called FAIR principles. That is, your data and your software should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And this all this means especially the aspect of being interoperable and reusable, that has to be machine readable. I will elaborate on that a bit later on. And the accessibility should be guaranteed via recognized archive and repositories. It's not like dropping a PDF on a website or something, but you should give it in to the hands of recognized archives and repositories. And also your software should be published if possible. This means software you more or less have developed yourself or for processing your data. And guideline 17, which addresses archiving, says that the research data on which published results are based. That's very important. You're not supposed to archive all your research data, all raw data, etc., etc. But those data who have led to published results, they are supposed to be stored in an accessible and traceable manner for a period of at least 10 years. And this period starts right after the date of publication of the results. But this is a very important aspect because when you do your research project, of course, you're obtaining your data, you're processing your data, you have those fantastic results. And at the point of publishing, you have to make sure that your data is available for 10 years. And just basically think of if you try to open and reuse data, which you've used 10 years ago, and try to find it. So you all know what this means. And that's why you have to think about how to archive your data way in advance. And you're supposed to archive the data at the institution where they were generated. For example, the university or University of Applied Sciences you're working at, or the research institute, whatever, or in an accredited repository. And I will talk about those kinds of repositories later on. So these are the most important DFG guidelines on this. And I've mentioned already quite often the word data repository. And how do I find this repository? Because as I said, it's not at all necessary to drop your data in sort of a PDF on some sort of website. So the DFG recommends to contact a suitable research data repository as early as possible. That means already when you're writing your proposal, you should, we strongly recommend to already contact or look for a proper repository and already to contact it, because some repositories, they have fees to drop the data at the repository. And of course, you have to know about that to be able to ask for funding for those fees. And also, most repositories ask for certain metadata, which is data to describe your data. And of course, you have to know about it in advance, because when you start obtaining your data, you should start describing your data with metadata right from the beginning on. Okay. And we strongly recommend to you to find your repository by at first have a look at your NFDI consortium. We have 26 NFDI consortia in this country, and they are very much discipline specific, and they can lead you to the relevant repository for the discipline. And if you don't find a way through that, contact your local research data management service center or help desk, or have a look at Read3Data. I see the question in the chat on examples of a data repository. I will talk about that in a few seconds. The question whether or not OSF is a repository, OSF is a sharing platform. It's not a repository as such, I'd say, but maybe some of my HeFDI colleagues have a different opinion on that. But to talk about the data repositories, what's a repository? It's a storage location for digital objects that make them available to a public or limited circle of users. That's what OSF already does, okay? And repositories can be distinguished according to the nature of stored digital objects, the discipline of the data, and the storage period of data. And here you see the screenshot of Data UMR, which is the data repository the Philips University Marburg provides. And that's a so-called institutional data repository. It takes up data from all researchers at the university, and it does not differentiate between disciplines. Yeah, I see the ongoing discussion on OSF, whether or not it's a repository. The open science framework starts much earlier in the process of the research data life cycle, so it allows you to share data right from the beginning on project management platform. Yeah, I would agree on that. And if you do not have sensitive data, because with sensitive data, it's a problem to store it in a project management platform which is outside Germany or outside the EU. Then it's a good tool to share your data, your research data, with others. Okay. Well, going back to the repositories, I already said there are 3 types of repositories, generic one, and Zenodo is very much well known as a generic repository to publish data. There are subject-specific repositories, and Robert already dropped the link concerning research data. There are recognized, that's a registry of recognized repositories. And with subject-specific repositories, we strongly recommend to have a look at your NFDI consortia. For example, NFDI for Culture has set up a repository called Radar for Culture. NFDI for Chem has set up a repository called Radar for Chem, etc. So there are subject-specific repositories evolving, and so it's really good to have to regularly have a look at your NFDI consortium. And of course, we offer the institutional repositories. Our HeFDI repositories are based on DSpace at all sites in Hessen. Have a look at our website and you find your institutional repositories for the Hessian universities and universities of applied sciences. But of course, we always recommend to use a discipline or subject-specific repository because usually their data is much better described than in our institutional repositories. Of course, our institutional repositories are set up, they are present and running in place, but as a subject-specific repository. Okay, and the DFG offers a checklist. You see the screenshot on the right-hand side. And I'd like to remind you that up to now, research data management is mandatory in all proposals. And we strongly recommend to you to contact your local RDM service center for support with your proposal. But to give you a few more hints, I will elaborate a bit on those aspects which I mentioned here in the checklist, what they actually mean. So here we address your DFG proposal and what to look out for. On the left-hand side, you see the research data lifecycle. This picture is frequently used to describe what to think about when you think at your research data. And it starts with data creation, data processing, data analysis, preservation, access, and reuse. And it's more or less how the research life cycle goes. You write your funding proposal, you start with your project, and you get your data, and you process your data, analyze data, and you publish your results, etc. So it's very close to the research process, but looks at the data. And you start with data creation, and what we offer to you and what we recommend to you is to start with a data management plan. You can use our tool called Research Data Management Organizer, RDMO. The RDMO it's like a questionnaire on your data, and you fill it in, and the most important effect is to make you aware of what to think about when you look at your data, which is like a very strong resource for you, for your research. And to be as good as possible, a data management plan helps a lot to make you aware and to clarify basically everything around processing your data. And the DFG and other funders are very happy to see that you have data management plans. And a question to my HeFDI colleagues, I'm not sure at the moment how mandatory data management plans are for DFG projects. I know it is recommended to have them, but maybe someone can drop a note on how mandatory data management plans are for DFG projects. I know for EU projects, they are mandatory. You have to have a data management plan, but with DFG projects, I'm not 100% sure at the moment. So maybe someone can drop a note on that.
For DFG also, with the BMBF, it depends on the funding, but DFG, it's always mandatory.
Mm-hmm. But not right at the beginning, not with your proposal, but later on you have to have a management plan, right?
Yes, but you, well, in your proposal, you have to say something about how you want to handle your research data.
Just as Thomas noted down.
Yeah.
But it really supports your proposal when you say that you either want to set up a data management plan using, for example, the RDMO, or already provide with a data management plan. Okay. And we go on with this part of data creation. At the beginning, you should think of describing your data. So you should elaborate on how does your project generate new data, or do you reuse existing data? And what data types do you use? And this means the formats you use, for example, image data, text data, measurement data. And how are they processed? And to what extent is this data generated? That means what volume is to be expected. And if it's a really huge volume, you need to say how storage capacities are for this data. And then you also need to elaborate for this stage of the research data lifecycle on documentation and data description. That means what approaches are taken to describe the data in a comprehensible manner. What kind of existing metadata and documentation standards do you use? I will elaborate on that later on as well. And what measures are taken to increase data quality? What kind of quality controls, for example? And what kind of digital methods and tools are required to use the data? This is what you need to note down. And data documentation always goes alongside the questions: who can understand my data? Who can open and reuse my data today, or in 6 months, or if most important, in 10 years? Because it's possible you're addressed within 10 years and someone says, okay, how did you get to those results? And you need to make proof of it. And that's what you should think about. How can someone open and understand my data in 10 years? Even yourself. That's most important. And I already said a few words concerning metadata, which are very important to describe your data. So this is a picture of a cat. The cat is the data, and the metadata is what describes this species. Here you see the file name, which is the name of the cat, and another aspect of metadata is the author, where you found the cat, what race of the cat, etc., etc. And of course, you can imagine a lot of further descriptions of this cat, if it's nice, etc., etc., the color of the fur, etc., etc., the age. So that's all metadata that describe the original data. And metadata is a love note for the future, because only with metadata we can understand research data. It's a structured description, and it should be machine readable. And with metadata, your data becomes findable in databases once they are published, of course. And the problem is that without metadata, your research data won't be understandable in a few years. And everyone expects you to provide metadata because rich and correct metadata are a strong provision to good scientific practice which the DFG expects, of course. And how do I do this? Well, in the beginning, I already, with the example of the cat, I mentioned what aspects you should note down. Of course, who collected the data, where, when, why, with which tools, which parameters were used, for example, in an experiment, what are the usage options of this data for others. Think of data licenses, think of publishing it with a digital object identifier in a repository, and what contains the data, for example, the scientific object, etc. And we mentioned quite a lot that you should use a recognized metadata standard to describe your data. And of course, you ask yourself, what metadata standard should I use? And here are a few hints what metadata standard suits for a certain discipline. For example, for natural sciences, it's the ICAT schema. Cross-disciplinary, like in our repositories, it's the Dublin core. Or for example, for the social sciences, it's the data documentation initiative. And there are a lot of standards available. And you have a link on this slide to our partner website, forschungsdaten.info. We contribute to this website, and there's a long article on metadata and metadata standards, which we strongly recommend to understand it. And of course, you can contact our help desk, our local help desk, and you should also contact your NFDI consortium on that, because a strong task for the NFDI consortia is to work towards consolidated metadata standards for the respective disciplines. They exist for some disciplines, not for all of them, but ask your NFDI consortium regularly. That's very important to be up to date on that. And we also get a lot of questions on, well, how do I do this? How do I annotate my data with metadata? And here I did provide you with a link to metadata annotation tools from the Digital Curation Center in UK. They provide you with a lot of tools to use for metadata annotation. And of course, you want to know whether or not your data is described according to the FAIR principles. And there are a few FAIR data assessment tools coming up. They are collected on the website of our colleagues from Turing. And here you also have the link to the Turing website for FAIR data assessment tools to help you with metadata and with how fair is your data. And of course, when writing your DFG proposal, you also have to elaborate on the technical storage during the project phase. And what we strongly recommend is not to mention Dropbox for storage, because it's not suitable for research data. Use your public infrastructure that's provided, for example, by your university. And we talked about the Open Science Framework in the beginning. As I mentioned, if it's not sensitive data, then you can use the Open Science Framework as a storage place for sharing and processing your data. It's this phase of the research data lifecycle. But in any case, in your proposal, you have to elaborate on how is your data stored and where. And we strongly recommend to contact your local infrastructure on that. And of course, if there are any aspects on information security or data protection for sensitive data, elaborate on that as well, especially on rights of access. And within the aspect of technical data storage, you should look at the 3-2-1 backup rule. Andre has provided me with this nice graphics. You need 3 copies of your data. You should store it on 2 different storage devices, and one of it should be in a decentral place of storage. And that's why we strongly recommend you to use your public infrastructure, because usually public infrastructure is supposed to adhere to exactly this 3-to-1 backup rule. And if you only say, well, I use 2 different hard disk drives and put them in my drawer, that won't suit for the DFG. The Hessian box is data exchange, but not data storage, and also sensitive data can't be shared on the Hessian box. Okay. And also in your proposal, you should address some legal aspects. For example, what are the legal conditions with regard to your research data? Sometimes there are specific rules. For example, with biodiversity data, just think of the Umweltinformationsgesetz or the Nagoya Protocol, etc., etc. It's good to mention them. But also the general legal conditions concerning research data. For example, are there any restrictions concerning reuse and accessibility? And also you should think of data and software licensing, copyrights, and rights of use. And to help you a bit with this, we have our slides concerning hefty legal aspects on research data. You find it in our Zenodo community. And also contact your local data management service desk or help desk to help you with the legal aspects of data. And of course, at the end of the research data lifecycle, we look at accessibility and reuse of data. And there you should drop a few words on which data is particularly suitable for reuse in other contexts or by third parties. Once again, you're not supposed to just publish all and everything, etc. What the DFG or the reviewers want to see is that you took a bit of time thinking about criteria, for example, how to select data which is apt for reuse, for example. It's in any case good to show that you're aware of whatever. In this case, for example, aware of that you should select criteria for archiving your data. So it's really good to show your awareness and that you took time to think about it. Also, at this point of your proposal, you should note down whether or not you plan to archive your data in a suitable infrastructure. If so, how and where? Are there embargo periods, etc., etc. And of course, when you think of long-term archiving, there are certain data formats which are suitable for long-term archiving. We've made a hefty recommendation for those data formats. Just to mention a few of them, this table is not fully translated, but just to name a few. For example, with spreadsheets, recommended formats are comma-separated files, and usual Excel files are not suitable for that. And for example, with audio files, WAV files or FLAC files are much more suitable than MP3 files, for example. Have a look at our hefty recommendation for suitable data formats, and it's also good for your DFG proposal to show you're aware that certain data formats are suitable for long-term archiving and others are not. If you note down, I will store my Excel files in my local drive, and that's not that good. And also show your awareness for the National Research Data Infrastructure, which is being built up. We have 26 consortia. The NFDI is supposed to systematically develop structures for sustainable, secure, and accessibility of research data. It's driven by a combination of scientific communities and infrastructures, and it's expected to make a link to your NFDI consortium in your DFG proposal. They are discipline specific, they are data specific, and they are really strongly evolving their services. So it's really good to have a look at their websites or their community events every once in a while. And it's also supposed to connect systematically to the European Open Science Cloud, although we know this is still a very evolving sort of pipeline. But that's the point where you need to refer to, or the structure you need to refer to with respect to your research data management in your project. And also what I strongly recommend to you is not to note down that you plan to do a singular development in your research project. We develop a new software. Our developer will develop a new software for addressing this and that innovative method or topic. The DFG will look at that very, very critical, because experience has shown that singular developments or own developments, if they're not integrated into long-term infrastructures, they diminish very quickly. And that's what the DFG does not want to. So turn to your local service points, to your local or regional infrastructure, to your NFDI consortium or recognized data centers and repositories. This all depends a bit on your discipline. When you talk about your research data or your code management, and use existing databases or repositories and tools to provide with a long-term perspective for your data and your code. And also, you talk about responsibility and resources. You should note down who is responsible for the adequate handling of your research data. For example, description of the roles and responsibilities within the project, and also what resources are required to implement this adequate handling of the research data, and who's responsible for curating or taking care of the data after the funding period. And this is the most important point: what kind of money and how much money you can get for your research data management. Let me first drop a few words on what you cannot claim from the DFG. That's what we call the Grundausstattung. The DFG has the expectation that local data backup and archiving is guaranteed by your institution, for example, by your university. And all costs that serve these purposes, like basic storage, etc., are part of the basic equipment and cannot be approved. You won't get that money, but you can get some money. For example, staff costs for processing the data, user fees, membership fees for repositories, data centers, whatever, are other costs that show up when you use established infrastructures. And you should always note down why you need these costs. You need them to gain access to research data, for example, or to process and prepare your research data or your software that you generate so it can be used by others. That's what you need to make proof of. And also the cost to transfer the data to a public repository. And when you refer to existing infrastructures, there's a prerequisite, which is that they have an accessible and transparent cost performance catalog. That's the prerequisite for the DFG. Okay, so you have to make clear on that, and then you can gain some money for your DFG funding. So here I come close to the end, and I will drop a few words on what you should not do and what you should do in your proposal. Don't mix up data management with your methods. It's something different. They want to know how you make sure that your data, which is obtained with public funding, is available for the public for at least 10 years after your project has stopped. What you should not do is make a backup to local hard disk or something and put them in your drawer. Don't use for sharing options like Dropbox. And if you ignore the possibility to have backup in the infrastructure of your university or institution, it's not good as well. And you should explain with a few words what this backup is based on. It's also bad to have no reference to the HeFDI or federal state initiative or existing RDM networks. If you have sensitive data or personal data, then you, of course, it's necessary to drop a few words on data protection. And here we go with what you should do. Of course, describe properly data, name metadata and schemas or ontologies, controlled vocabularies, head for a data management plan, which is strongly recommended, also for you as well as for your funder. Show your awareness that you do data management to be more transparent, more replicable, to offer more reuse of your data, which is collected with public funds. Head for data publication if possible. Name the repository and contact it in advance. Show how you enable yourself or other people in your project with data literacy and training. We offer a lot of training in HeFDI, by the way, and reference to HeFDI or state initiatives. Well, and just a few words for those who are concerned with collaborative research centers. In collaborative research centers, it's possible to have an own sub-project, which is called an INF project. And very often you can be equipped with one data manager or data stewards. And this INF project works for other projects. It's like a Z project. And here again, you have to make sure that the data management is to prepare data for subsequent use or for reuse and for internal interoperability. It's not just like a Beamer IT something. It has to be that to make data available internally and externally. And the data management has to be project specific. And what's needed is a close cooperation with local infrastructure, for example, computing center, university libraries, etc. What you cannot obtain, as I already said, is hardware. That's basic equipment, and it's not like an IT specialist or method specialist for the CRC. That's what to think about for CRCs. Of course, we can talk about that later on as well in the discussion. And just a few tiny wrap up and some links for where you can get some support. The DFG has by now a very nice website on RDM, much better than the years before. There you find the guidelines for your professional associations, for your discipline-specific associations. Of course, we strongly recommend our own website and our local service centers on RDM, our data services, which are provided by the respective local universities, of course. We have some FAQs, and there are very good discipline-specific information on our partner website, forschungsdaten.info. Well, that's about it for my talk. And I'm very happy to take your questions.